Hi friends, this is Josh from musiclikeyoumeanit.com. Thanks for joining me for this next installment in the From Start to Finish Metalcore series. Today I want to talk about how I crafted a room sound for the drum tracks in this mix. To start with, I think it's important to talk about the role that room tracks can play in a drum mix. In modern metalcore drums, a lot of times the sound we're going for is a lot more dry and upfront, so there's often not as much room tracks in the mix overall. For me personally, I like to use room tracks in modern heavier genres like this to help add to the picture of the drum kit, so the sense that the drums are all being played in one place at one time. I also like to use room tracks to add energy to the drum shells in a mix. Part of what makes a drum set sound exciting when it's played in a room where you get to listen to it live is the way that the room reacts to the drum set as the drummer is hitting the snare drum and hitting the toms. You get to hear that room reaction, and that's part of what we perceive as a high energy drum sound. In this mix, I wasn't actually given any drum room tracks, but let me tell you the story that led up to the moment where I decided to craft the tracks that I have here. If you've watched the overhead processing videos already, you'll know that the overhead tracks in this mix have a lot of drum shells in them. While I actually don't have a problem with this in general, it did take a little bit of extra work to help focus the cymbal sound in the mix. Whenever I have to overcome any challenges in a mix, I like to also stop myself to check in and see if there are any hidden opportunities that these challenges provide. In this case, I had so much of the drum shells in my overheads track, I thought, why not try and also shape this into a room track? So that's actually what I've done here. I duplicated the overhead track, and with a bit of processing, I was able to get kind of a cool, high-energy drum room sound that's adding a little bit to this drum mix that I wouldn't have been able to get really any other way. Let me show you a particular section of the song here, and I'll turn this drum room track on and off so you can hear what it's adding. So it's definitely mixed low, as is typical in this genre, but what I'm hearing there is the drum room track is adding a bit of extra length to the snare drum and kind of just a aggressive overall energy to the drum set as a whole. I like how it brings together the drum tones I have already, especially because a lot of these are based on samples, and it's easy to get samples sounding like a lot of different parts, but not one cohesive whole. Let me step through the processing for you here that I've done on the track in order to get that sound. To start with, I'll show you what this sounds like without any processing. So this is just the live overhead tracks that I've duplicated. You can probably hear what I'm talking about there. There is a good deal of drum bleed in these tracks to start with. Now, as I'm thinking about transforming these into something that sounds like a room track, I'm keeping in mind kind of the key elements that I want to go for. These are mic'd with two microphones positioned over the top of the drum set. So the cymbals are going to sound very close, and even the drum shells are still pretty close to the microphones. To make this sound more like drum room mics then, I need to shape the track so that it sounds like it was recorded from further back in the room, farther away from the drums themselves. There's a few ways that I can do that here, and I've applied a few different types of tricks in order to get this sound. So let me show you what we've got. To start with, I want to make sure that I point out how I have the track itself actually panned in. So this is not hard left and right. You can see it's panned in just a little bit towards the center. The reason I'm doing this is because the overhead recording actually has a very wide stereo image. But as I'm picturing the small drum room where this is recorded, I realized that the natural placement of drum room mics would not sound quite as stereo as overhead mics that get to be placed closer to the source. So by panning this track in towards the center a little bit more, I've already started to focus the sound before I've applied any processing. The first plugin in the chain is the FabFilter Pro Q3. To make a source sound farther away from the microphone, one thing you can do is cut some of the high end. That's because as you get farther away from a source, it does sound a little more dull and you lose some of that high-end energy. You'll see that here I have a high shelf cut at 2.5K and up on this track. And then I also have a high pass filter here at about 280 Hertz. The high pass filter is just cleaning up some of the rumble from the kick drum. And then this high cut here is making a big difference in terms of how close the microphones sound. So let me show you what this is doing. So that's already helping the track sound like it's a little bit farther back, a little bit further away from the drums. And then the next plugin I have here is the Pro Tools Reverb. Now, I don't actually want this track to sound like I've applied a reverb to it. I have some reverbs that I'm using that I've showed in earlier videos, and I just want this to sound like a realistic drum room. So I have this set on the smallest room size possible with the shortest decay here. And this sounds to me as close as I could get to what I imagined this small drum room would sound like if we had put microphones in it to record the real sound. So let me show you how this changes the shape of this track. With this short of a decay, the track doesn't even really sound like I've put a reverb on it at all. More just like microphones far back in a drum room. In terms of other settings, I have this set to 100% wet, and then I also have a low pass filter at about 7.5K that's helping tame the high end to keep this sounding far away. After I added that reverb, I have another EQ here, again the FabFilter Pro Q3. Here, I'm cutting some more high end above 8K, and then I have a bigger chunk taken out around 2.5K that's especially helping push the China farther back in the mix. Finally, there's just another little bump here above 400 Hertz, which is helping boost the body of the snare. Let me show you what this plugin is contributing. Yeah, that 2.5K cut really shapes the China cymbal and helps move it farther back so that this is more focused on the drum shells, which is what I'm going for here. The last two plugins I have in the chain are actually working together to shape this sound in a specific way. Remember how I said that a high energy drum sound in a room is in part created by the way that the room reacts to the drum shells themselves? Well, that's what I'm going for here with these last two plugins. One of my favorite ways to add some of that high energy sound to drum room mics is with an 1176 style compressor that's getting hit really hard on the shell hits themselves. So let me show you what this compressor is doing by itself to start with, and then I'll talk about how I shape the sound even further from there. So this is the Waves CLA 76, and I have the room preset on here, which gives me a fast release and a slower attack compression. That's going to allow the attack of the drums and cymbals to come through here, while I can kind of crush the rest of the drum sound a little bit more. Let's hear what this is doing. So that's cool. It is giving me more energy out of this track, but you can hear that because the cymbals are closer to these mics, they are still kind of taking over in this compressor here. In order to help address that, I've used this gate plugin before the 1176 compressor. I don't always do this trick on drum room mics, but sometimes it can be a great way to help get this high energy sound that I'm going for. What we have here is a gate that's set up to listen to a sidechain, which is coming from the session snare sample in this case, which is kind of my main direct snare sound in the mix. I have this sending to a bus pre-fader, so that means no matter what I change on the level of this track, the send is always going to come in at unity gain. The gate then is listening to that external bus and opening and closing based on the snare sample instead of the track itself. So this 8 decibel gain reduction here is helping pull back the rest of the kit And then when the gate opens up on those snare hits, it lets the snare through, essentially making it sound like the snare's played louder in this track. It takes a little bit of work to get this to sit well in the mix and not sound too obviously like a gate is working on the room tracks. So I always try to make sure to dial in gates like this in the context of the whole mix until I can't hear the effect anymore. It's true, I could get more volume here with more aggressive settings, but as soon as it starts to sound like an 80s gated reverb, I lose that realism that I'm going for with this track. A cool way to see what this plugin is doing is to look again at the 1176 compressor now that the gate is on. Let's see how this changes the sound that's going into the compressor here. Before we were getting maybe 3 to 5 decibels of gain reduction on each snare hit, and now this compressor is basically just working when the snare drum hits, giving us, it looks like, almost 20 decibels of gain reduction. Now that we've seen all the parts that make up this sound, let me play it again in the context of the mix, so you can hear how it's adding to the drum energy and helping bring the whole kit together a little bit more. When I have a drum sound that's made up of this many samples, to me, it's worth pursuing any opportunity to add some real sounding life to the kit. In this case, I was able to turn kind of a challenge into a unique opportunity to create this drum room track from the real tracks given to me in the session. As a result, what we have here is a much more cohesive drum sound overall, and as an added bonus, because these are real sounds from the session, it even feels like it's helping bring the samples back into the kit a little bit more. So that's all I have for you today about creating room tracks in a mix. If this is the first time you're joining me, I want to also make sure to recommend my free workshop that's available at musiclikeyoumeanit.com/workshop. There I go over 12 key decisions that are behind all the great music that's being made today, so that you can see how to make those decisions more intentionally in order to take your music to the next level right away. The best part of the workshop is that the tips there apply whether you've been doing this for 20 years already or whether you're just starting out. So make sure to give that a listen if you haven't yet. It's available at musiclikeyoumeanit.com/workshop. Thanks again for hanging out with me today, everyone. Keep making great music, and I will look forward to seeing you all next time.